Hello and welcome. In today's video, we will be turning this into this. Today's tutorial will guide you on transforming a default untextured landscape into a fully textured dynamic one. We will delve into everything about landscape materials, sprinkling in some handy tricks to turn your landscapes into works of art. Whether you're an Unreal Engine novice or a seasoned pro, there's sure to be something new for you to learn in this tutorial. Before we start, I just wanted to say that this tutorial will assume that you already have a landscape, as the art of making a landscape and making a landscape material are two separate things. I also wanted to say that this tutorial will be using textures from the starter content and from the Quixel Bridge store. This tutorial will work with any textures you want, though. If you want to use the exact textures and landscapes as me just to learn, I have a link to the project I'll be using in the description. Alright, now that we have covered the prerequisites, let's jump right into the tutorial. The first thing we will need to do is make a base landscape material to build on. To start, we will need to right-click in the content browser and create a new folder to hold our material, and give it a name like mats, and open it. Now in this folder we want to right click and create material and name it as something like landscape mat and open it. This is the material graph. It is different from the blueprint graph in that instead of controlling the logic for game assets, the material graph controls the properties of materials. It is still a node-based system and the controls are the same, but some of the hotkeys are different. For example, pressing left click plus T will create a texture sample node, or left click press L will create a linear interpolate node. Now, using that hotkey from before, press left click plus T twice to have two texture sample nodes. Next, we want to go to the content drawer at the bottom and press the dock in layout button so it does not close on us. It will pop out as a window, then you can move it to the bottom of the layout to always have it. Then we can go to the starter content folder, and in there we can go to textures. Then we can search for grass in the search bar. You'll see textures, a green grass color texture and a blue normal map texture. The normal map is a way of adding detail by modifying lighting to make it look like you have more detail in the mesh than what exists. Once you have the two textures, you can add them simply by clicking on the sample. Then, in the Details panel, under Textures, just drag the texture. Now that we have the textures in the sample, we want to connect them to the output node and have our texture control the material. Start by dragging the RGB value from the color texture to the base color pin, and you'll see the sphere on the left go from its base black to green like the grass texture. But right now there is no normal map, so it looks flat and undetailed. To fix this, drag out the RGB value from the blue normal map texture to the pin called normal on the output node. Now if you look closely at the sphere, you will see that it has what looks like small bumps all over it, giving it some much needed detail. As you may have noticed, currently the sphere on the left looks shiny and unnatural for grass. This is because by default all materials have a roughness value of 0.5, with 0 being completely reflective and 1 being fully matte. To fix this, we can use a roughness map if your texture comes with one, or if they did not, you can right-click on the roughness pin on the output node and hit the Promote to Parameter button. You will then see a box where you can input a float value between 0 and 1. To make grass look natural, I would just use a value of 1, as in real life, grass is a matte color. Now we can hit the Apply button at the top of our toolbar and hit a save and go back to our map. Now, in the content browser, we want to right-click the material we made and hit the Create Material Instance option. This will create a copy of our material where we can change any public parameters without having to recompile the material. Just as an example, if you open up the material instance, you will see a grayed out option for the roughness parameter. If you hit the checkbox next to it, you can change the value to whatever you want in real time. If you want to set a limit on how much it can be changed by back in the material graph for the parent material, in the details panel for the parameter, you can set a minimum and maximum value for the slider. If you do that and hit apply back in the material instance, you will see a limited slider for setting the value. Now that we have our material instance, we can apply it to our landscape. To To do that, just go to the outliner and select the landscape and everything under it using Shift. Then in the Details panel under Landscape Material, drag the material instance you made over the input. You will then see the entire landscape turn to grass. Right now all we have is grass, and the grass is clearly tiling, but these problems will both be fixed before the tutorial is over. Now we will fix one of those problems, that being we only have one texture. To fix this, open back up your landscape material and create a landscape layer blend node. Then in the details panel next to layers, press the plus icon 3 times, or however many times you want, one for each base texture you wish to use. Then next to index, open the drop down and change layer name to whatever you want. You also have to change LB weight blend to LB height blend for all 3 layers. To do this, just click the drop down next to blend type and choose the correct one. For this one I will use grass, rock, and gravel. Then for the normal map, just copy the node. Now when you only have one texture and you're not doing anything too complex, it is fine to just do it all in the material. But when you start to get more complex, you really should use a material function. A material function will allow us to make the graph for one texture, then reuse the graph without having to copy it. To start, go to the content browser, then in the mats folder from before, right-click, and under Material, select Material Function, and name it Texture Mod Landscape. And then open it. Now to get started, drag out a Make Material Attributes node from the Output Results Input pin. Then for the base color pin, drag out a Texture Sample node. Then from the text pin on the texture sample, drag out a Function Input node. And in the Details panel, name it Texture. Now to control the UVs of our texture to help with tiling, we can add a Texture Coordinate node. Then from it, take out a Multiply node. And from B, drag out a Function Input node. And in the Details panel, name it Texture Tiling and connect the output. Then you can hit Apply and save it and go back to the material. Now, in the material, drag out the texture mod landscape function 3 times, once for each texture you have. Now for the texture and texture tiling pins, right-click and promote them to parameters. For the names, you can just add what type of texture it should be next to what the input is. For example, something like texture grass, and just do that for all of them. Now for tiling, a good default value is 1. And for the textures, just go to the textures folder in the starter content and search for the textures and drag them into the details panel. For grass, just use the same grass from before. And for rock, the basalt texture looks nice. And for gravel, you can just use the one named ground gravel. Now get 3 texture sample nodes and use the texture parameter output as the input for the text pin of the samples. Then from the functions, connect the output to the layer pins on the blend. And from the texture sample node, connect the R value to the height pins on the blend. Then copy and paste that for the normals and rename the parameters from texture to normal and set the sample types of the 2D texture parameters to normal. Then you can find the normals in the starter content folder and set them for the texture parameters. Now we can delete the old texture samples and connect the layer blend output pins to the right input pins for the output node. Then you can hit apply and save and go back to the map. You will see that the landscape has become a black void. This is because we need to make the layer info for the different layers of our landscape. To do that, go into landscape mode and in the paint tab under layers, press the plus next to each layer type and make sure to select non-weight blended layer and save it in the default location. Now that we have our layer blends, we can paint our other textures on the ground. Grass is still the default, but if you go to the Paint tab, you can select the layer that you want to paint, and if you press the left mouse button, you will paint that layer. If you hold Shift with the left mouse button pressed, you will delete that layer's color. Now, being able to paint different textures is cool and all, but what if we could get the engine to help us out a bit? This is where auto materials come in. When set up properly, the grass layer will automatically paint rock on steep cliffs for you, just like how it would in real life. Before we continue, I just wanted to say that if you are liking the video, subscribing would really help out, and you can see more videos like this every week. Now that you have subscribed, let's get back to the video. First thing we need to do is go back into our landscape material, and we will make 2 texture samples, and we will use the same rock texture and normal from before. This will serve as our cliff material that will automatically apply. Then for tiling, get a texture coordinates node and use the same rock parameter from before. Next, you want to hold down L plus left click to get 2 lerp nodes, one for each texture map. Next, for alpha, we want to right click and get a world aligned blend node and connect alpha to the base color lerp and the with explicit normals pin to the alpha for the normals lerp. Then connect the RGB value of your cliff texture map to the A of the lerp. And for the B pin, we want to connect to that layer blend for that map type. Then connect the output to the pins of the output node. Now for the input for the blend node, I will just use some good values I found on the Unreal Engine forums that happen to work with me, so play with them if you want to, but I'll just use these. First, hold down S plus left click and name the parameter blend sharpness. Then connect it to the blend sharpness pin and set its value to 15. Next, make another parameter and call it blend bias. Then connect it to the blend bias pin and set its base value to -6. Then you can connect the maps to the outputs and hit apply and see the changes in the map. Now, as you can see, even with seamless textures from the starter content, it is still obvious that our texture is just repeating itself. But this is a fixable problem. First, we need to go back to our material function from before, and in it, we will need to make some room. Now we will work on micro variations to shift the tiling around and make it less obvious. Start by right-clicking and add a multiply node and a vector3 parameter named microtent set to white, and connect the RGB value of the texture sample to A and the vector to B, then connect the output to base color. Now create a comment around the nodes by selecting them and pressing C, and name it micro color. Then copy and paste them, then name the copy microcolor variation, and remove the texture input from the copy and use the original. Then for the tiling scalar, rename it to texture tiling variation, and rename the microtint of the copy to microtint variation. Then change it to a pale yellow color. Does not need to be exact, just get in the ballpark. Also, instead of using the RGB value for the A of the multiply, just use the green value. Now to nicely blend between them, we will need to make another texture sample, and we will set this one to T underscore macro variation, which is a noise map included with the starter content. Then to control its tiling, we want to make a texture coordinate node with a new scalar input called micro variation tiling alpha, and multiply them together and use that for the UV's pin. Next, create a lerp node and use the red channel of the macro variation texture for the alpha. Then use the output of base color for the A and the output of micro variation for the B. Next, use the output of the lerp for base color. Then you can hit apply and go back to the main material. Now back in the main material, we want to make two new scalars for each texture. For texture tiling variation, just copy the base tiling and rename it by adding variation to the end for all of the different textures and change the default value to 0.6. Then for micro variation alpha tiling, you can create a new scalar and just set it to 0.01 by default and use the same one for each texture. Then you can go back to the map and see the results. Now we can add macro variation to the textures to break it up even more and make all tiling disappear. To start, go back to the material function and copy the texture sample for the variation and create a texture coordinate node and multiply it by a constant of 0.005 and use it for the UVs. Next, create another copy and make the constant 0.15. Now to get to the brightness, take the red channel of each and add 0.5 to them. Then multiply the results together. Next, put it in a comment and name it macro variation noise. Next, create a lerp node. And for A, create a function input named noise contrast. Then leave B set to 1 and use the output of the multiply for the alpha. Finally, multiply the lerp by everything else we have and use that as the output. Then hit apply and go back to the main material. Now for the noise contrast, make another parameter and set the default value to 0.5, then use it for every input. Then you can hit apply and go back to the map to see the changes. Now that our tiling is fixed and the auto material is set up, we are done. If you liked the video, please subscribe and ring the bell. It will help me a lot and allows you to see more videos like this every other week. If you ran into any problems or have any questions, please leave them below or in my Discord. I love to help. The video appearing now was picked by YouTube, and I know you will love it. Until next time, have a great day, and bye for now.